What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the infamous gas chamber. But before we get into all that exciting stuff, let me cover the basics. My name is Michael Inman and I'm an airman in the United States Air Force. I make a video every Monday, so if you like Air Force and or military content, definitely hit the subscribe button below and make sure you turn the notification bell to on so you know when I upload a brand new video. Without further ado, let's get started with this. First things first, the gas chamber is actually part of a course called CBRN, and CBRN is required to be passed by all trainees before they graduate from Air Force basic training and or possibly Army boot camp. Now what does CBRN stand for? CBRN is actually an abbreviation for 4 and or 5 terms depending upon when and how you see it. But always the C in CBRN represents chemical, the B biological, the R radiological, and the N nuclear. And finally, the optional E will stand for explosive and or IED. And all of that is to tell you that the gear you're going to both be provided and learn how to use is given to you so that you can protect yourself from the hazards that may be in your environment and or may be headed your way, unfortunately. So let's get a little bit more into my experience of learning how to use CBRN gear. Also, it's important to note that CBRN, at least for the Air Force, takes place during Beast. So we are starting out on some of the hot topic videos of your Beast experience. Let's get into it. On the day when it is your flight's turn to go to CBRN and or the gas chamber, you are first going to get onto a bus and be driven from your basic military training Beast campground and you will be bused to what I would describe as a large warehouse, or you could even call it a large farmhouse or barn. But inside of this large warehouse, you will find rows of buckets and or pallets of equipment and or gear that you are going to, of course, have to find your size and then continue down the line to eventually get to a spot, I'm pretty sure, where there was no chair. But maybe there were chairs. I don't really remember, but eventually you're going to grab something from each of the big bins that correlates with your individual size, and then you will find a spot past the last bin to kind of wait for things to get started. Now, once you find your spot and all of your flight has each of the corresponding pieces of the gear and or equipment, that is when the kind of the lesson or class part of CBRN does begin. What might that entail? Well, some of you probably guessed that it starts off with kind of explaining the history of CBRN equipment and of course why it started to be provided to soldiers, because it became necessary during wars during the 20th century. So after the short and brief history lesson, that is when you also kind of start learning about the different tiers of the CBRN equipment. And this is also when I will introduce to you all what the equipment generally is called. And that is called MOPP Gear. And it's actually not spelled differently. Is it spelled differently? It is spelled differently than the mop you use to clean your home. Unless you live in, like, I don't know, squalor. But that word is MOP. This acronym is MOPP. And it actually, extends out to mean mission-oriented protective posture gear. And that is all to say, like I said, that this gear is what you put on when you are in any environment and or where you are is going to be targeted with anything chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and possibly explosive and or IED. And so moving forward, we will of course refer to the gear provided to you as MOPP gear. So during your academic portion of your CBRN and or gas chamber day, you learn the different levels or tiers of MOPP gear and how to put that gear on to that level of protection. And by put on, the proper verb would probably be to don. So at what degree of protection do you need to don your gear? So if it's MOPP level 1, maybe you're just putting on the outer layer and possibly just a single pair of gloves. But for example, maybe for MOPP level 4, which is the highest level that we were taught, you are probably going to have your outer layer, including a gas mask on top with both 2 pairs of gloves and a couple other things to make sure that all of your extremities and all of your extremities are protected and all of your skin is covered from any contaminants outside of your MOPP gear. That of course is going to take, I'm pretty sure it took a lot longer than I expected. Like if I expected, hey, you probably could have taught us this in 45 minutes to an hour, you might or might not be in that warehouse for like 3 hours. And that includes everything from the history lesson, which we spoke about, going into the different tiers of MOPP gear, and then also doing a couple practice rounds of how to get into your MOPP gear, depending upon the level of MOPP gear, pretty quickly. So how can you put it on if you hear the alarm bells going off and you need to have a mask on, preferably in 7 seconds, preferably. So that is what the first kind of half of your day is going to be like. And then eventually there will be a lunch break. And following the lunch break is when you and all of your peers will start getting pretty antsy because we all know what happens next. You guys got it right. We are going to the gas chamber, everyone. Now, if any of my Army friends are also watching this video, just for some context, this is when our experiences do tend to overlap a bit. Following your lunch break, you will gather again with your particular flight. A couple of other flights, of course, are also in the warehouse having this be their day that they are going through the CBRN course. But after all of the practicing and, of course, getting your gear put into something that you could hold and getting ready to leave the warehouse, you then need to find your particular flight and get ready to be filed out of the building by your particular CBRN leader. So let's say it's finally your turn. You and your flight are going to be exited from the warehouse, and then you are going to go on, let's say, a 10-minute march. I wanted to say walk, but it feels like a march because you're carrying all this stuff. And secondly, because of all of the anxiety and tension building up because you all know what is coming. So you and your flight are marched through the woods, the buildings you will pass, if I remember this correctly, on your way to the actual gas chamber. Look real rough, the paint is peeling, and it looks like you're walking through the set of a horror movie. When you do eventually arrive to the gas chamber, that of course is when all the fun does begin. At first, your CBRN leader will kind of give you off, pass you as a flight on to the people who are based at the gas chamber. And at the gas chamber, they will start their brief. Their brief will, of course, describe some of the expectations, some of the things not to do, some of the things you should expect, and anything in between. But after their brief, and once it is your flight's turn, because after the brief, they're then going to start going kind of in rows of which flight's turn it is to go into the gas chamber. When it is your flight's turn, that is when you are going to get in line, be provided an actual mask for the gas chamber, because even though you were provided some MOPP gear, the mask you actually, even though you got to practice putting one on and everything, you did leave the mask from the warehouse in the warehouse, and actually the mask you were going to use in the gas chamber was provided to you at the gas chamber. So, and of course, some of this may be slightly nuanced during 2020 and 2021, just to limit the different gear one individual is using. But for my experience, when it was my flight's turn to start getting in line, we were provided our mask, and then of course, we got in line in front of the big scary doors. Once the line started moving, that is when you know you're about maybe like 10 minutes out from the experience. So the lines, there were 2 lines. Our flight was broken into 2 long lines. And of course, the 2 first people from our flight's lines were behind the last people from the previous flight's lines. And because it was just this kind of never ending, train going in to the gas chambers. So eventually, once we got close enough to the doors, both lines would count probably 10 people back. So in total, 20 people approximately would go into the gas chamber. Once it really was your turn and your line had effectively and or successfully divided itself into groups of 10, with the last group having probably some people from the next flight in it. Once that occurred, let's say it's finally your group's turn, you guys would see the gas chamber doors open in front of you. There would be no one in there because just like it's kind of like a roller coaster and or experience at an amusement park, that group has already filed out. So once the doors open for you, you are going to go into an empty gas chamber, and pretty much the first thing they're going to tell you to do is line up against the walls. And in the middle of the room, there actually is going to be almost like a grill. I know that sounds stupid, but there's like a grill. Like there are hot rocks in a brick square oven thing in the middle of the room. When you get into the room and everyone has filed in the room and their back is against the wall, the doors that you entered through are going to be closed. And of course, the doors that you see that you will exit through are clearly closed as well. And that's the moment when you know it's real. They say, pretty much, do what we say. Do not take your mask off till we say take your mask off. And when we say take your mask off, take your mask off. That is when the Air Force, at least, when I compare it to the Army uses some kind of, for lack of better terms, gunk. But the Air Force has cute little pellets. You could almost call them poison pellets, but that might be a little bit of a stretch. But we have these cute little pellets that the CBRN instructor just puts a few on the hot rocks. And that's when you see gas starting to rise into the room. And that's why I said it's a little more aesthetic or cute, because like I said, in the Army videos, they have this like gunk that they put on something hot like a skillet, and it just starts creating smoke everywhere. And I just feel we have a much more thematic or visually appealing way to do it. You just have this bag of poison pellets and you just sprinkle them onto the hot rocks, and it just causes a whole hoo-ha in the room, okay? Once those pellets are thrown onto the hot rocks, that is when your CBRN instructors inside the gas chamber tell you guys to do some PT. And this is to kind of help you guys really understand that, assuming you put the gear on correctly, and that's the important part, assuming that you did follow their instructions putting on the gear, you are actually not having any difficulty breathing doing the PT. So even though the room is filling up with this very, very toxic gas, almost from the movie The Fog, even though the room is filling up with this toxic gas, you are doing activities that are increasing your respiratory rate. And so it kind of just lets you know, even though you're really focused on the gas in the room situation, and you're focused on, I really hope there's no leaks in my gear. If so, I'll be feeling it so shortly. Oh my God, it's gonna hit me soon. That's what you're focusing on. But actually, subconsciously, there is some trust building, because for everyone in my room, no one had any leaks, and so we all were able to do the PT exercises and not start having a whole hot mess situation occur. So thus, the gear was doing its job. So after the PT, that is when you are told to stop for a couple seconds. You are able to kind of get your breath back, and that, when I say a couple seconds, I mean like 4. And that's when your CBRN instructors kindly tell you, now everyone, when I say so, remove your masks. And when you do that, take in a deep breath. And then please start, communicating the Airman's Creed. And, eventually, when we see everyone is saying the Airman's Creed and is, pushing through for a bit and holding their mask to their chests, not touching their face whatsoever because it will cause issues. When we see everyone is doing that, and we really feel, while you guys are struggling, when we really feel that we are satisfied with you guys following our instructions, that is when we'll open the door and you guys will file out of this room as you were taught in regards to how to do that properly. Is everyone ready? They don't say that part. No, sorry. They don't ask if you're ready. They just say, remove your masks. So when I personally removed my mask, it's interesting. The first thing I noticed, luckily I did not experience burning of skin. Other people's experience burning of skin. I just immediately started watering. It almost felt like there was pepper, not in my eyes, but around my eyes. And so it wasn't a code red for me of just burning eyes, but it was like a subtle fizzle happening around the eyes, but way more water than matched the feeling in my eyes. So it's almost like, why am I personally not in more pain, even though my body, or my eyes specifically, are reacting as if like my eyes are on fire? Because like I said, I felt a subtle sizzle, but my eyes or my tear ducts were like, like it was really trying to cool something off. So anywho, that was my experience in regards to when I took my mask off. Also, when I breathed in prior to starting the Airman's Creed, it did feel like I inhaled pepper. So I immediately started coughing. But after the initial coughing, I also will admit that for me, luckily I guess, I didn't have a sense of dying. It was just like there was a pepper-like substance in my lungs. So not burning, my lungs weren't on fire, it just felt pepper-like. That's the best I can describe it. And so when I looked around, briefly after starting the Airman's Creed and kind of in a half second being like, thank God I'm not dying right now, I did look to my left and right and to the people across the room from me, and they were not having such a good time. There were a couple who weren't showing any signs of distress. They were doing much better than I was. But then there were people on the entire other side of the spectrum who were unwell. And that's an understatement. There was huge amounts of coughing. There was huge amounts of tears. I mean, that was me too. It just looked like a minimum amount were in agony. And I don't mean to laugh, it's just crazy how people's experience really did range quite a bit. But let's focus on the rest. Within probably 15 seconds, a long 15 seconds, but still only 15 seconds, they were like, okay, everyone, turn to your right. Everyone turn to your right, or the people on this side of the wall, turn to your right. The people on that side, turn to your left. And you may now exit orderly the room. You may exit the gas chamber in an orderly manner. We exited the gas chamber. We kept our hands extended to our left and right, which is what you are instructed to do. And that is to ensure that the CBRN instructors on the outside can also ensure that you are not touching your eyes. Because what you can't do is bring the chemical from the gas that is, of course, solidified or at least rested on your hands. You cannot put it actually in your eyes. Yes, it is, of course, making contact with your eyes when it's in the air, but for it to, of course, create a residue on your gloves, for example, and then because your eyes are burning, you go outside and start doing this. That cannot happen. Don't let that happen. So that is their priority. So we are instructed to keep our arms fully extended when we exit the gas chamber and to just follow the person in front of us, even if they're fuzzy because we can barely see. They are making sure we're not touching our face. And pretty much once you get out of the gas chamber, two things relatively happen. One, Within a couple seconds, your body immediately starts to go into, okay, we're not dying mode. Like the symptoms start to fade away pretty quickly for about 50% of the people. I do hope you are in that 50%. Also, you are immediately kind of walked to the area where you are lined up in flights for the initial CBRN gas chamber brief. And when you get to that area, you then start to walk in these big, big circles. When you get to that area, you and your flight and anyone else who came right before your flight or after your flight will start walking this large circle that is kind of specified by 4 orange cones. And you'll start walking for literally, I think, like 4 to 8 minutes. You just continue walking this kind of mini track. And it just helps give you time to entirely recuperate. Like I said, about 50% of people will start to feel less crappy within the first 30 seconds to a minute outside of the gas chamber. But the other 50%, of course, it's going to take a bit longer for you to stop hacking up your lungs, aka coughing aggressively, for your eyes to stop burning intensively, and just other things that you were feeling just because that's how your body happened to respond to this specific type of gas. And so you just walk in circles, and like I said, if you're allowed to walk, most people walk for like, I think you have to walk a minimum of 3 to 4 laps, but generally that takes 4 minutes, but between 4 minutes to 8 minutes, everyone is back to normal and they can breathe like they did before they went into the gas chamber. And so kind of the last 3 things I think that are important to leave you with. The first being, when you get out of the gas chamber, make sure you're blinking quite a bit, because the blinking will actually allow your eyes to do their thing in regards to removing the unwanted material from the surface of the eyeballs. Because when you blink, of course, you're going to create extra water. So it's just going to try to wash it out. So just blink to your heart's desire without leading you to limit your visibility so much that you are running into humans. Because if you run into someone in during such a vulnerable and uncomfortable time, I don't know how they're going to respond. Because if I was just getting out of the gas chamber and out of nowhere, like I can't breathe, I can barely see, and out of nowhere someone's running into me, I may get pissed, okay? And I hopefully won't push them. But it's the bad time to be running into people. People are sensitive right now. So blink without going blind. Secondly, remember that the silver lining in all of this also is it does clean your sinuses out quite well. You will not have any gunk up here or down here following the gas chamber, because all of it will come up. So within the 2020-2021 lens, that's not a great thing, that's disgusting. But for a normal kind of way of looking at life, it is a plus. It is nice to know that anything there will be cleansed out before the end of the day. And the last thing that I think is very, very crucial to remember is, like I said, there will be a very wide range of responses to the gas that both the Air Force and, of course, the Army uses in their CBRN training. So that shouldn't scare you. Just go in there optimistic that you will not have a totally terrible response. But if you do, remember that within a few minutes of getting out of the chamber, you will feel exactly like you did before, just with less gunk in your lungs and or nose. So that's an upside. And I cannot end this little tidbit without mentioning the little hack that tends to be mentioned in these types of videos. And that hack is that if you are an element leader or a dorm chief, you do tend to go in first. So what does that mean? That means all of the element leaders from the flight literally create the first lines that are divided into groups of 20. And we do it first. So the gas chamber has not really been used that day, at least not in any, large capacity. because we are the first of the flights that were assigned. We are the flights assigned to the CBRN course that day. And then the element leaders from all the flights are the first people to go through because they want us on the outside when everyone else goes through to just guide our peers to walk in circles, to help them out, keep your hands away from your face, those things. So it is important to note that if you are an element leader or dorm chief, you are going to be going into the gas chamber when there is not residue gas just filling the space from all of the previous groups that went in before you. Meaning it probably gets worse every group. Because the only time the air gets a little less concentrated with the gas is when the doors open briefly for people to leave or people to enter. And so the last group to go to the gas chamber has a different concentration level of the gas than the people who go first. So maybe that's why I wasn't dying. But at least I can claim that. I'm not Superman. I just went in early enough to maybe not have my eyeballs burning and my lungs coming out of my mouth. So that is one motivation for you all to try to be element leaders and or dorm chief. You heard it first. You heard it here first, folks. I want you to be your best self and be a leader. If only to go into the gas chamber earlier rather than later. Thank you guys so much for listening. Also, I think it is also worth mentioning that all of this, the important thing to remember, this entire experience, this gas chamber thing, is really so that you trust your gear. Because if we're ever in a situation in which we needed to don our gear, put on our gear very quickly, it would be super unfortunate if 30 to 40% of military members didn't even trust they would do it, and thus were not motivated to put on their protective gear very quickly. So through being able to have the gear on and do the PT while all of that gas from the poison pellets is filling the room, without all of that happening, I don't know if we would get to trust it as much as we do. But being able to be in that room doing all of that PT and the gas filling the room and actually not have any symptoms arise, it does, after you're able to reflect on the day, it does give you that trust. If you enjoyed this video, definitely make sure that you subscribe, comment, and like. Of course, if you want to find me elsewhere, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Michael A. Inman _. And I will see you next Monday.